Okay, sorry for the delay, folks, but welcome to tonight's 2019 RC Match Official PD webinar series. Module 8 tonight will be on communication and game management, a topic that we could probably go on for about an eternity on, but we'll try and touch on some key points and be sure that everyone walks away with at least one or two extra little pieces in their toolkit when they go out to referee in their next match. By the way, I also apologize for the delay in setting this back a week. Unfortunately, there was a health incident within the family. All is good, but it just delayed a few things. So we had to reschedule our webinar series this month to today and tomorrow. So thanks again for everyone's patience. So we'll just run through our objectives for tonight. By the end of tonight, we'll hopefully have everyone get an understanding of how to involve team captains in managing a game of rugby, see examples of appropriate communication tools to use during play and at downtime, see examples and have an understanding of how to manage the game on the fields. Some of this is all going to happen at the same time, but we're going to try and break it into some parts. And then lastly, just be reminded once again of the implementation of the World Rugby High Tackle Framework from Rugby Canada's perspective. So we'll just touch on that real quick at the end. Feel free, as always, by the way, to type in some questions in the questions box. And then what we can do is try and address as much as we can at the end. And then we'll wrap things up after about an hour. So as we always do, we're going to try and tie in today's topic with our Rugby Canada referee profile. So when we look at the profile, lovely little image there, our focus tonight will be to look at using game management techniques to establish consistency in decision making and communication. And the reason why I want us to focus on how these tools can help us with our consistency in our decision making as well as our communication is because what we communicate tends to be almost the basis of our philosophy when we go out for a game of rugby in terms of how we then go and referee certain phases of the game. And if our communication is clear with players as to what our expectations are and how we'd like to work with them to get the game to unfold, the likelihood, the more likely we are to have clearer pictures of those scenarios in our minds. So hopefully by increasing our clarity around our communication, we're also able to add clarity with our own vision of the game as referees and how we can work with players to get buy-in. So from a specific point of view, we're really not focused on anything technical tonight. It's really all about our tactical ability during the game and understanding the game and that contextual judgment piece. So making sure that we're getting what's relevant. Our communication is only as effective as our decisions, in the sense that if we're not credible in our decision making and it's not what the game needs, it's going to be tough to get players to buy in regardless of how well we're able to communicate. So there is that side of it that we do need to be aware of. But when it comes down to game management, we're going to look at establishing what is clear communication, looking at how we establish a positive environment, and then remaining calm under pressure is certainly a thing that will help. We are going to look at specific techniques around that next month, hopefully with a guest speaker, which will be nice because I think everyone's had enough of my voice after 8 months. And then we'll tie that into tonight's presentation as well. So yeah, so that's what we're going to take a look at tonight and how it relates back to that profile piece. Okay, so captain and player buy-in, obviously really big one. And I think this goes without saying, but the player perception of your ability as a referee starts with the player perception of you as a person, in a sense, right? So that credibility starts from the moment we arrive at the pitch, and that'll include things like how early or late we arrive, what do we kind of look like when we get there, are we dressed the part, what's our attitude when we show up, what's our demeanor, how are we behaving with the captain and coaches and players, as well as our team of three potentially, right? So how is all of this building into what we're going to try and do over the next 80 minutes or whatever game we're refereeing. For me, I really like looking at making the pregame about, well, I mean, we take that philosophy of making the game about the players to the pregame, right? So how do we ensure that we're taking that same approach as we would on the field to the stuff that we do off the field before the game starts? So asking when a good time to have a chat with the front row is, when can we do our boot check, our coin toss, and all that kind of stuff with the captain to make sure that we're not impeding their ability to prepare themselves for the match as well. And this to me is a big one, is following up by empowering captains in that captain's chat. So I really do like to look at it as though they are responsible for their team's behavior in a way. And I don't mean in terms of committing incidences of foul play or not. I just mean in terms of their ability to change their behavior when it comes to their understanding of certain expectations at different phases of the game and their ability to buy into that, right? So the behavior thing isn't necessarily our players talking back or not. The behavior is our players adapting to the things that we need to see. And part of that includes us as referees needing to be aware of our own I guess pictures at the time and our decisions, and whether or not we might not be getting buy-in because of our inconsistency and that kind of thing. So we need to be aware of that. But at the same time, players can't control that, and we need to work with captains to adjust how players react and their adjustment in behavior. So if the captain's responsible for that, how do we empower them? So my conversation with them will often ask them to take an opportunity in the game when we've had a conversation, the captain and I, to translate that message to their team and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And I'll give them that opportunity throughout the match to address those issues as they arise. And if they can't, well, then I'll have to deal with it directly. And that often means I'm going to give a team warning or a player warning, and then we'll move into whatever other management tools we need, right? By the way, we're not going to touch too much about game management from a progression of infringements perspective today. It's really a focus on the communications piece and getting that player buy-in, but we will touch on that tomorrow, just because the scope of the next month, because the scope of this topic can be so broad. So here we are. That's right. So if we cannot get players to change behavior, if the captains can't do it, then we need to address issues in another way. So let's just watch a couple of examples, a couple different examples, and then we can have just a brief opportunity to think about, okay, well, what was it about those interactions between the referee and the players, and what are some of the trends we can pick out, or I guess attributes we can pick out that would be more positive or negative to getting that player buy-in. So as we do, we'll watch the clip once, and then we'll have an opportunity to discuss it.
Advantage. Hold on. I've got it. Yeah, come here. No, it's high. It's a shot. There's no attempt. Go. Time's off, guys. Time's off. Injuries down.
Okay. So take a half second to think about that one, and then we'll compare it to this conversation.
9 right here. 9 right here. Yeah, he wasn't really crowding your space, so we don't need to push him, okay? Because that just adds to the temperature of the game we don't need. Okay, so let me manage that if he is crowding your space, but give each other space. Is that okay? Thanks, guys.
All right. So I think what we could take away from those two conversations is a couple of things. One is the tone or the speed of the delivery, and then two would be how is it that players are reacting, and are we getting them to buy in? So in the first video example here, a referee might have a hard time winning over players, and let's think about, okay, well, what are the different aspects of the delivery here that we want to take a look at: the tone of the message, the body language, and then obviously how players are reacting. So I don't know if everyone can hear the video very well, but what we'll do is I'll just walk through a couple of things. So for me, no issues necessarily with the whistle, but even just the way he says advantage, right? It's as though he is very involved in the incident as a referee, having to really it's not as though he was yelling it for everyone to hear. It was more of a very harsh kind of call. And I know this is being pedantic in a way. Most players probably didn't even hear it, to be honest with you, but it's an indication of the temperature of the referee, right? And that's why I'd like us to take note of it. Sorry.
I've got it. Yeah, come here. No, it's high. It's a shot. There's no attempt. Go.
Okay, so the couple things. The first part is the lack of actual clarity of what happened. The second part would be the lack of actual interaction with the captain to get an understanding of why the decision is being made to yellow card the player for the high tackle. And then finally, it's the buy-in from the players and the reaction of, goodness, I have no idea why I'm getting this yellow card, but here I go, trudge off the field. It's just that ability to get players to understand where we're coming from. They might not agree, and they probably wouldn't have in this case. And that's not really the point. The point is, how does the referee now get them to say, well, listen, I don't agree, but you know what, if that's how the referee saw it, then we're going to be able to accept it and move on. And we haven't achieved that here, right? So when we compare that to our second clip here, the only other piece I would note with this example is the language that the referee uses. So outside of the lack of clarity, just the couple of instances of go and pointing to the sideline, again, very harsh kind of communication style that doesn't necessarily get the buy-in that we want from players and captains. When we compare that to our referee in this instance, addressing an issue between the two nines.
So we don't need to push him, okay? Because that just adds to the temperature of the game we don't need. Okay, so let me manage that if he has crowded in space, but give each other space. Is that okay? Thanks, guys.
So what I really do like about the situation and the referee's communication is the fact that he's asking both players to do the same thing. So saying, yes, it may have happened in this one instance, but the reality is it's something that maybe both of us are doing, or if not, it at least lets both of them know that it's something the referee's picked up on and is going to manage before it becomes a flashpoint. The other thing he does very well is he asks for buy-in, right? Typically we do that pre-game where we ask players for acceptance of the expectations, let's say at scrum time with our front row, and say, are we all understood? And then hopefully we can refer back to that during the a downtime conversation to say, hey, remember we spoke about this pregame. Let's make sure we hold ourselves accountable to it. Here, the referee's been able to take that approach in game with the two nines, knowing that we're still early in the match. We're probably going to have a few more scrums, and if we can get this little niggly part out of the game between the two nines pushing each other, we're probably going to end up with a better outcome when it comes to the temperature of the game in those moments. So the referee does a really, really good job of getting that buy-in. One of the things that came to mind with this particular clip was it reminded me of one of the things I had to work on, which was when I would ask for understanding, I would finish my sentences with the term right. And so I would say, Captain, I need your players to become a little bit more compliant with the offside line. All right. And it's not necessarily it was the rhetorical question, right? Basically saying, if you don't do this, then I'm going to get upset about it, right? So I had to transfer how I communicated into we statements, but that's just a personal thing, right? So using, if we can work together on this, then hopefully we can achieve a better outcome, right? So help me out with this, and then we should be able to get somewhere. And using the we statement is how I had to change that. Here, the referee doesn't really need to go there because the question is a genuine. Are we all right with how I'm wanting to approach this situation? So I think the referee does a good job here of making sure there's clarity for the players involved here, the 2 nines, on how we're going to go about managing that part of the game. Okay, so here's a couple of other examples of captain's chats, right? And I just want us to get a feel for what's appropriate at what part of the game potentially, as well as what are just some different ways of saying what it is we're trying to say to our captains in some of these instances. So for the most part, I try to refer to Canadian context. The reality is referees on microphones isn't always available. Last year's under 19 senior women's U20 women's competition in Regina had quite a bit of audio, but then again, the selection of matches didn't always have incidences where there's the type of interactions we're looking for. So I've had to compile a few different things together, but for the most part, we'll be watching matches from that tournament.
Calling out to Conrad Smith. Eventually he's got his attention.
There's 2 in a row now, okay? When they're going backwards, the guy's got to make the effort to take the extra half yard. You have 4 over there and this guy's 10 here. Just keep making that effort, okay? So there's no trend building. Thank you.
Speed of the rack ball and the momentum that the Chiefs are getting is causing this problem.
Right, so I thought the referee does a pretty good job there of getting the captain to understand that there's the potential a trend evolves in the offside line. And once cleanouts happen, players not retreating to that clear offside line, but rather cheating some space away from the attack. And an earlier webinar looked at how do we manage that space, understanding how the concept of being able to work within the space you've earned is a really big deal when it comes to the game being able to move ahead. And so this is a good example of a referee trying to get the captain to buy in. Not much interaction from the captain, right? I think he's pretty understanding of where they're at. So just a pretty good example, I thought, of a referee just early in a game outlining what it is that he's seeing from a potential trends perspective. Snip it in the bud. Let's have the team work on that, and empowering the captain to go back to his team and have that conversation.
For a second, guys. David, we've already had 2 big offsides there. So another one here. Your guys just aren't backing up. I need them to put it on. This is a warning. I need them to get onside, okay? Oh. You got to steal first, that's why. It's not releasing. You're not releasing, then you're offside. Okay? Offside.
All right, so you don't see the time, but it's late in the first half in this game with the second example. So this is after that first yellow card incident where the dangerous tackle resulted in the yellow card. So this happens afterwards, and you can see the referee had actually calmed down quite a bit. But again, just a little bit of that abrasiveness when it comes to that blow the whistle, time off. Okay, now captain calls him by his first name, but in a really short kind of, I guess not aggressive, but certainly a very strict kind of way. The explanation is actually quite clear. We've had a couple of offside incidences, and then he gives an opportunity for the captain to be heard. Which is a very good thing at times, especially when there's mounting frustration when it comes to players not quite being on the same page as the referee. So when there's a lack of clarity around why it is a referee might be making certain decisions, we definitely want to be able to give them an opportunity to be heard, because then it will help get that buy-in a little bit later in the match. So we've looked at a couple of examples of, okay, how do we get players to buy in? So there's a couple of pieces there around just the tone overall of how we deliver our message. So we are going to take a little bit more of a look on what does it look like when we go about our refereeing, and the reality is much of our communication is absolutely nonverbal. So let's watch these two clips here and let's take a look at, regardless of what the referee is saying, let's just look at it from a spectator's point of view. How do you interpret the referee's, I guess, credibility almost in a way when it comes to their refereeing, regardless of whether or not the decisions are right or wrong? This is where we sometimes get confused. We look at these incidences and say, oh, well, the referee was right or they were wrong. Well, sometimes it doesn't matter when it comes to the players on the field, because their reaction might not be one of acceptance of those decisions. So take a look at a couple of examples. We can have a quick chat. Okay, let's compare that to the next one.
The mark. Right across from us. That's good right there if you want it. That's yours. Yeah. I'll always give you defense, offense, gift. Yeah. Make sure we set our feet before we go on.
Okay, a couple of longer clips, I know, but and I apologize if we have a hard time hearing, but I will go back and walk through, not the whole clip of each one, but just briefly look at our communication with the officials and the players involved. So in our first example here, we have a lot of what seems to be some indecisiveness by the referee. Now, it was the first game of the tournament. You know, two teams that were fairly well matched. so I can understand if there was some nerve, certainly. So we have an advantage here, which is well inside the 10 meter of the opposition. We're playing the 9. And then we end up with another advantage here for the player offside for Ontario. So the biggest thing I think we can all take away from this example is, again, just what is it the referee is trying to achieve? Does the referee look credible in trying to achieve that? So we're playing a really long penalty advantage where we've gone back now at least 40 meters by the time we end up at the whistle, right? And then when we do have the whistle, it's, do I let this turnover play on, or do I come out of it and keep going? So let's look at body language, tone of communication, and then the credibility of decisions and why it is we're playing on here. And so the lack of decision here, by i.e. blowing the whistle earlier, is certainly something that players would look at in terms of, okay, well, what is actually going on here, and why is it that we're not buying into the referee? Okay, so that would be the kind of outlook I would have in that kind of situation, right? And I asked the question below here, what are the attributes we see in the referee in each of these examples, and how do we work to have credibility right from the start? So in this example, right off the kickoff, we have some very, very crisp communication from the referee, calling the advantage on the knock-on after the offload here, I believe it is. So scrum advantage, we'll play the phases, we get to advantage over, it's a real quiet, nice and easy advantage over. Everyone's on the same page, we're good to go. Doesn't say anything all the way up until we get to the line out. Helps the AR, marks over there. Very quick feedback to the setup of the line out.
Make sure we set our feet before we go up.
Everyone's good. All very calm, cool, and collected. And this is my favorite part coming up. So for me, the change in tone here by the referee is what makes that ability to get that ball out quickly so effective, right? Without the rest of the communication being nice, calm, cool, it really accentuates a difference here in the 2 off. Now, could we add a color to the communication? Sure. Thankfully, in this game, everyone's clear about who we're talking about when he says that. Players have a good understanding of what the expectations are. 2 off, hands away, ball's able to move, and then we get the ball out wide for the try. So the difference there in body language from the referee, going from phase to phase, as well as coming to the line out, just the clarity of purpose when it comes to the referee's communication and ability to move around on the field. So certainly a huge part of the referee's ability to get the players to really buy in throughout this game is set right from the beginning, and it's with a lot of confidence in their ability, and that shows in their body position and their posture throughout, and the I guess the nonverbal communication. So outside of presence, which is a massive part, what other communication tools do we have? And during play, we often find that less tends to be more in a way. So we'll watch a couple of clips again, and we'll just take a look at why are these effective. Look.
Advantage. Do you have a number? Thank you. Advantage number 7, offside. No advantage coming. Number 7, offside.
Okay, so the first example here, I can't remember if didn't have a note underneath. The first example here, the quickness to manage the offside line by the referee. The referee says back before I even hit pause. And so it's before the 9 is even in a position to move the ball. So if we're gonna be proactive or trying to be preventative. We talk sometimes with our referees about being preventative in our communication. Does preventative mean they've infringed, I've asked them to then do something so I can buy some time to get away from having to call a penalty? Or is preventative the ability to get players to not infringe at all? So I'm not having to say, the best examples are tackle or roll away, right? By the time we say tackle or roll away, well, they've already been on the wrong side of the ball. They've already likely slowed down the ball enough for us to get the ball off the ground quickly, and they've already given their teammates some that extra half second to realign on defense. So saying roll away is often just a way for us as referees to buy time for ourselves in order to be able to play away. Now, where it can be effective is when we know it was always going to be slow ball. So that gives us an opportunity now to say, okay, well, now let's roll away, and then we're going to get the ball away. It was always going to be slow because the clean out was a little late, or whatever the case might be, but it gives us an opportunity to buy some time, sure. This particular example is an excellent way to look at how do we actually prevent the infringement from happening in the first place. Clean out was always going to be in good support. They were always going to win quick ball. So the referee, if he's going to manage the offside line, has to say it before the nine's even looking to move the ball. And he does a really good job here of pointing at the player, getting the player to understand that in order for him to be able to contest at the next phase, he's got to move back behind that hind foot of the ruck. He does a really good job of actually doing that. So we'll just watch it one more time. It was really, really well done. This example, I know it's not a game management, a preventative example, but what it is a really good example of the referee not saying anything more than what the players need in order to understand what the infringement was, why we're coming back for a penalty, and who was the infringement against, so that if the captain needs, they can address it, or whatever that looks like. So just a really good job, I think, in this example of the referee being really clear.
Advantage. Do you have a number? Thank you. Advantage number 7, offside. No advantage coming. Number 7, offside.
And that's it. That's all we need to know. Number 7 was offside. There was no advantage coming back here. Very, very well done. So that to me is the essence of what is quote unquote effective communication. It's that ability to get players to clearly understand what it is we want to see. And it's not because we're right and they're wrong, but because in that moment, we as the referee have decided this is what's relevant and this is what needs to be addressed. But more importantly is that if it's gonna be in a preventative nature, it's done well in advance of when the infringement might happen, and it's in the proper context of what the game is gonna need here, right? So again, that offside line example with our referee was great because it was well before the player who would have been offside had any material effect by actually getting them to move back. And again, we go back to that tackle or not rolling away example, right? The infringements happened. If we need to buy ourselves time, that's a different form of communication. All right, so we're gonna look a little bit when it comes to game management on how do we get that player buy-in a little bit more when it comes to different, I guess, phrases or things that we can say, or how do we say them, and interactions that we can have with players. So the other thing too, like I said, is we're not going to focus again on progression of infringements just because of the scope of the conversation, but we will get to that next month. So the biggest thing for me is how do we empathize with players on the field in order to help get them to understand that we're in it with them, because we are in a rugby game with them, and we do need to work with them, right? So getting them to understand that we do have their interests at heart when we're making decisions, and we do want them to adjust, and we will adjust if we need to. That is a part of empathy, is admitting when we might be wrong. Is critical to getting that buy-in. So let's just look at a couple of more examples here and just ask ourselves, how does this form of communication help build rapport with players?
First infringement, tackler must roll. Ladies, we've had 2 penalties for the tackler not rolling very quickly. Let's be wary of that.
Okie doke.
Thank you, number 8.
All right, a couple really subtle examples that we can touch on here. So in the first one, the referee is in a 0-0 game, early in the game, looking to ensure that we establish some consistency in a certain phase of the game. Now it's actually 5-0 in this juncture of the game, because the previous example with the same referee was after right at the beginning of the game, and there was a try scored. But anyways, so we've had a couple of infringements for not rolling away, and what the referee does really well here is he doesn't feel it's I need to bring the captain in and have a formal warning, but we're all going to a line out. This is a really good opportunity.
We've had 2 penalties for the tackler not rolling very quickly. Let's be wary of that.
It's a really good opportunity, downtime opportunity for the referee to have a quick word with everyone. Even if we end up with another not rolling away penalty in the next few minutes, that's okay. We've set ourselves up now to have a chat with the captain, right? So it's part of that scripting nature of the game, where we provide ourselves with opportunities to sell our decision in a way and get players to buy in, right? And then this one, I thought it's just the small things, the little nuances in the game, right? Quick tap off the penalty. Number 8, Black, hasn't retreated and goes to reach and doesn't, and the referee just gives a quick thank you. And I think, to me, that is a massive part of how we get players to buy in, because it shows that we're aware of the game, we're aware of what players are doing, and we're aware of when players actually do pull out, when they do have an opportunity to commit an infringement. If she makes a tackle there, it's a potential yellow card because they're inside their 22 and a girl is trying to quick tap and go quick and she has no space to work with. So instead of taking a yellow or at least a penalty, she's able to work her way out of it. And for the referee to acknowledge that probably goes a long way, I would imagine, I would hope at least, to get the players to buy into, yeah, the referee's got a good feel for this game. So I know it's a really small thing, but to me, it's a really, really important thing. So this goes back to the point I was making just now about how do we get that feel, right, of the temperature and the feel of the game. So we had the one earlier with the referee talking to the 2 9s, and then we had the referee here just give a quick little thank you. They're just aware, right? So the other things that we need to do around this awareness piece was, okay, well, if we do run into a situation where the temperature is rising, how do we now address this? How do we address the potential conflict that can arise between the player and the referee, or between players? And again, letting them feel heard when there's a little bit of frustration is key. And then the other place is, there is a time and place to be firm, right? But it has to come after our efforts to get players to buy in. So here's a really popular example from Steve Walsh, who did a lot of work on his game management over the course of his career. So we'll have a listen to this and then this follow-up example afterwards. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, listen. The difficulty is, of course, now the numbers. They're obviously penalties for different things, but it's now numbers of penalties. We just obviously need a little bit of discipline around how keen you guys are. Pardon? Yeah, no, the first thing I've got, okay, is the guy coming through playing your halfback, and then the guys coming around offside. We've got it multiple. I just need you to tidy everything up for me, otherwise you're going to lose somebody. Okay.
Well, that was pretty nicely done there by Steve
Right.
Walsh,
Time back on, please.
having a conversation with.
Okey doke.
3 blue offside here. Come in, Matt. 3 blue offside here. Deliberately playing the ball, mate. That is it. That's your warning. Take the message now. Next one won't be tolerated. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so in the first example, we have a referee who's really trying to work to get some buy-in because we're only 26 minutes into the game, and it's still a fairly tight, excuse me, score line. But what we don't want to do is have to go down the road of handing out a yellow card this early in the game if we can avoid it, right? I mean, if it has to come out, it has to come out. But the referee does a really good job here. The players clearly exacerbated it a little bit, just trying to get a better understanding of a couple of things. Really wanted to get something off his chest to get an understanding. And I think the referee does a really good job here of working with the player to get that understanding on that particular incident, but then bring it back to, hey, we still need to address all of these things. Yeah, so I thought that was a really good job there by the referee. This is a really loud clip. I'm not going to play it again, but clearly the referee had a message to send, and it needed to be sent pretty firmly. Now, I don't have the entire context of the game for this one, but what I would say is that if there's been that first effort that we just saw Steve work on with the captain for Argentina, if we see that throughout the game, and then we get to a point where, oh, I'm just not getting that buy-in, we're just not able to get to the same place, then we might need to have a different type of interaction where the captain needs to get a message across right away. Otherwise, now I'm doing something different, right? So there is a time and place for that, but we need to make sure it happens after we first try to get that captain to buy in. I think in that first example, the captain really comes away with, okay, I'm clear on what we need to do here. Let's go and work with our team on this one. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to show us is, okay, well, what does it look like when we look to put it all together? And I think this is a great example of our referee in one of our first examples who, actually the very first video example, who just looked out of sorts in that first game of the tournament. And I think with a little bit of work on some of our confidence going into our decisions and our outcomes and our communication, we're able to put it all into something that looks pretty nice. So we'll take a look at this. That is a very, very powerful moment for me because it really exemplifies a lot of good work that the referee did to kind of put it all together. So from a communication standpoint, I think there's a couple of things we can take away. So the mic was on that whole time, and we hear very, very little up until it needs to be said, and it's exceptionally relevant. So we'll have the penalty for the high tackle. We're in a kind of innocuous position on the field. The players all get the decision. There's really nothing to argue about it. There's no explanation needed. And we were, because we had quick taps most of this tournament at the under 20s level, which is this match. So we end up just being able to play away with just the signal. No need for any more communication. I think we do a really good job here. And then when we go phase to phase to phase, nothing really needs to be said. The cleanout's taking care of the ball. Offside line's pretty good up until we got to make a decision here. Really concise communication. Can't play away from the knock on. Back.
Offside.
And then this is where I think we get so much of a win, like it's just a massive win. So it's a big, loud tackle. Everyone now is clear of their responsibilities, or should be. So if you're the tackler, tackle assist, ball carrier, everyone knows what their responsibility is now, or tackle player rather than ball carrier, because the tackles happened. Okay, ball's short. Good work by the referee. Again, ball's short. Players now know, okay, we need to go again. And then we get we get a try, which is what everyone wants to see in the game of rugby. So for me, that is an excellent progression from the referee from what we saw in that very first clip, first game of the tournament, to now we're able to put a package together where the communication is relevant. It's quote unquote preventative in the sense that we're anticipating what needs to be said here in order to get players to be able to react accordingly, right? We're at the goal line. We can get away with stretching our time out a little bit more. So we don't need that super, super quick ball, especially if they're not looking to go wide, which they're not. So we can go tackle, get players to move away. Let's see if we can get another phase. And then that communication of it's short, and it's just these concise words that really help players have an understanding now of, okay, this is what the expectation is. So for me, that was a really, really big win for the referee coming away from that tournament there. All right, we're running out of time real quickly, as we do with these. So just a few quick notes for our CMOs. So the biggest thing, obviously, that we can refer back to as a coach and match official is the pre-match planning by the referee. So have they looked to address any issues around communication or game management? One of the things that we can look at is, as a CMO, is do they have a go-to phrase when communicating with captains and players? It can help. So what I would say is a couple of things. One is when we script everything we say, we can seem somewhat robotic at times. And the other thing too is it might not necessarily generate that immediate rapport with players, because it can be very scripted sentences or phrases can tend to be very to the point and not kind of nuanced with how you would have a conversation with a friend or a colleague or something, where you're a little bit more informal, right? So I think that informal piece when scripting can be difficult. So it's just a matter of making sure that, okay, well, yeah, we might have go-to words maybe. Sometimes we refer to law speak. Let's just be clear with, this is a thing that I need to have addressed with the players in reference to a thing of law, right? So a lot of examples we saw with the communication with between officials and players was around the offside line, just being really clear around, we need to see a change when it comes to the hind foot or moving back or giving space. Whatever the terminology we want to use, we're still referencing the offside line, right? So it's just making sure that we're clear about those pieces. We do need to, as a CMO, ensure that referees have credibility of decisions. So if we don't have credibility when either giving a decision or because we're having an issue with accuracy, okay, so those are two separate things. Dealing with accuracy is a technical piece. It's not necessarily a game management piece. However, inaccurate decisions affect our ability to manage the game. So it is important that we do look at, if we're having a hard time managing the game, can we point to inaccuracies from a technical perspective? Because if we can, or even a tactical perspective when it comes to reading the game and what the game needs, if we can address those, we might have more success in managing the game because it'll be easier to get players to buy in. So that's the first part. But the second part to that is the delivery of credibility. So taking that first example with our referee, where there was just a lack of credibility because of the immensely long advantage we played, even though we were consistently going backwards, and then just very hesitant to blow the whistle twice, and that, you know, just that whole look and feel might be the biggest issue when it comes to game management. So when we look at credibility, we got to look at it from those two lenses. Is there a technical, tactical thing we need to fix first? And then the second part of it is the delivery ensuring credibility? Because we could be technically, tactically correct, but when we come to the delivery, we're really struggling to get players to buy in. All right, and then that comes down to the referee's body language, tone, delivery, and then player reactions, right? So just keeping an eye on those things because they're really good triggers. And again, it's not to say that players are right or wrong or referees are right or wrong, but when we have player reactions that are negative, it's usually because we're not on the same page, regardless of who's right or wrong. So that's the issue that needs to be corrected. So looking at that. And then a question we might want to ask ourselves and our referees is, how do we practice our communication strategies week to week with our family and friends? I think too often we think, oh, well, I'll listen to this referee or I'll listen to that referee and I'll, you know, change this going into my game or change that going into my game, but I don't really practice it. And there's a whole bunch of literature out there on purposeful practice, but the biggest thing is, for me, we can definitely take this aspect of managing a rugby game to our off-field stuff, whether it be at home, with family, with friends, in our workspace. How can we use some of these strategies to practice in those settings, and then see if we can then, you know, use them when we get out onto the field on a weekend or weeknight or weekday, whenever we're refereeing. Okay, so that's our game management and communications portion of the webinar. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in our text box. I'm going to real quick just reiterate Rugby Canada's implementation of the World Rugby High Tackle Framework, which was as of July 1st. So like I said, the biggest issue is around whether or not players and coaches and spectators are going to look and see, oh, is there consistency in it? To be fair, up to this point, I haven't heard a whole lot of messaging around it being inconsistent from people. So just realize that there will still be some kinks to work out in the process. But there was actually recently a really good article from one of the individuals involved in the creation of the high tackle framework, who does some research out of South Africa on dangerous tackles. For some reason, his name is escaping me. I've said it about 1,000 times since yesterday, but anyways, but it goes on to explain how the framework is supposed to work, which is we need to keep using it and practice using it for people to get on the same page. So it's not a matter of we implement it and we're going to see immediate reduction in high tackles or immediate consistency in application. What we're going to see is a working out, feeling out process, but as we use it, hopefully over time we'll see the trends move in the right direction, right? So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to fire away from that or the content around communication and game management. Doesn't seem like we have any at the moment. Which is, I guess, a good thing. So I guess we'll call it an evening. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day or night for joining us. We will be back again tomorrow night in French, and then next month we will take a look at managing stress as a topic of discussion. And then again, looking at managing our progression. We're going to have to move that into next month's session as well. So thanks once again. Have a great night, and we will see you again shortly.